You gotta help me, I'm losing my mind. Keep getting the feeling you wanna leave this.
Minaj, I pulled out a lot of his quotes to mention for various questions and talking prompts, and he's awesome. You should watch his Netflix series, Netflix video special, Homecoming Queen, Homecoming King, where basically he talks about his experience with a prom and some microaggressions he's dealt with. He is a minority, and he's a correspondent on The Daily Show. We look at, Trevor Noah. He's the Daily Show anchor, so you see minorities doing really awesome things. So they're able to overcome it somehow. How do you address those things? Because they must have done something that, isn't something everyone does.
Okay, a couple things come to mind. So I think that I've experienced this, not necessarily inadequacy, but like stigma for either women, being a woman, or for my ethnicity, more from peers and from people that were supervising me, or like teachers or anything like that. So it was more in a social setting than in a formal setting. The formal setting, I think, is more. Now, here I come with my academicness. I feel like it's more systematic, where you do see it reproduce and you do see it exist, but you don't necessarily. The direct experience is not so direct, like to my face, like you're telling me something. It's more of an indirect, like, oh, it exists. It's more complex. I don't know how we're gonna change the system. So I guess the original question is, where have I felt inadequate? When I've been presented with like an extremely rich population, and I'm like, but even if you share, like, even if you advocate for different things, or if you aren't hardcore, like materialistic or whatever, even if you're not the stereotype of rich,
you don't feel materialistic to me at all.
Huh?
You don't feel materialistic to me at all.
I mean, like, even like if I'm with a rich population, even if they're not materialistic, even if they're not necessarily in that mindset, I will be like, oh, just because you haven't experienced it, I don't think you can speak from a place of like understanding. So that's more where I felt more inadequate. Like, oh, okay, I understand you might say this, but you don't know.
I like what you said, when you feel most inadequate, because I feel like that, for me, the phrase is very helpful. So I feel most inadequate when I make mistakes in the workplace. So I think for me that's because I grew up in an Asian household where you needed to be good, you needed to be right, you needed to not make mistakes. Accidents don't happen. Accidents happen because you're dumb. It's other verbal abuse, but I think that's a hindrance. Because you don't really strive beyond that, because you get so discouraged half the time. So I do see that as like a hindrance in terms of feeling, in terms of my mental and emotional well-being at work. Because I think it's more me. Nobody really understands what's going on in my head or the things that I'm feeling, but one certain event could be a catalyst for my feelings or whatever for the rest of the day or whatever. I mean, I catch myself in it, but it's there. So if we're talking about going back to cultural upbringing, like that's a big deal.
Yeah, and if I could even add, I think that's really important of how you feel, because I'm very like headstrong of like, no, I'm not inadequate. Like ever. Even though that's not necessarily true.
But your words are so powerful,
and I think that like it's unfortunate we can repeat certain lies about either if it comes from our background or comes from like certain situations we've been in. We can repeat those lies in our head and believe them, and so even if I don't want to neglect the fact that we do live in a broken society, but I think that the greatest change comes from your own perspective. So even if all forces are against you. Like if I am strong within, knowing where I stand and knowing who I am, that won't necessarily like bring me down. You can think whatever you want of me. I know who I am, so
That's awesome.
like,
But how do you keep that? Because I feel like I can sometimes have it, but like I deal with so many inadequacies, and I like my roommate shared something that I feel like would be helpful to share with you guys because it meant a lot to me. But I come from a religious background. If you watch my other videos, you know that. And one thing she said to me was something a coworker said to her, and it was basically that like if God places you somewhere, like you are there, you know. Like God wants you there, so you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be scared. Like God placed you there. And something I actually really dealt with was, and like a coworker like didn't mean this in like a negative way, but I'm an untenured teacher, and like in passing, people would say to me like the guy who had my job before me got fired. He was a white male, but you know he got fired, and I would continually be told like be careful because you know you're not tenured, like you can get fired at any point. And it started to like seep into me and like kind of rot my self-confidence because I would always be like, well, I have to do this like this because I'm afraid I might get fired. Like I wasn't doing things because I wanted to do it in excellence. I was doing it out of fear of being fired. And I realized like I could not like live my life like that, you know. If I'm gonna do my job well, it's because like I want it to honor God. I want to do things and I want to do it well, but I can't do it because of like a fear festering in me. I feel like I have to constantly like refuel that because it's so easy for me to go back to like, but I'm really young in my workplace.
that's interesting. I do have some. I don't know how how related it is.
Yeah, so
but like I don't want to take up all the like interject. So I can relate to that, and I think that so I am also like a Christian, but I came to faith more like I dedicated and recommitted and was more intentional about my faith in college, and so that's when I started reading the Bible and like going to church a few years later and like really engaging. Before that, I was more like
Culturally.
no, not even. More like so with that now I'm in ministry, right?
Yeah.
And I think I'm with a university, which is how I got really involved in my faith in college. And I'm working with a university and I'm leading as staff in 2 campuses. And as I see the team like is very strong. I love the way they like study the Bible. I love the way that they pray.
Your student team?
No, this is the New York City team of staff. So with that said, basically the thing is that what helps me is prayer. So I stop and I pray, and I mean I don't necessarily have to stop. I can pray like no matter what, but I stop my mind from racing, and I just like
That's good.
and I pray, and I'm like, okay, time out. Like stop. Like reorient yourself. Well, what are lies that you're? What are your motives? What are you really like? What is causing you to behave or think this way? Like see the root and then replant it in the truth. And then I'm like, okay, let's go. Because like in whatever position you're at, like you said, if God called you to it, it doesn't matter. Like where I can be talking to Obama and like, we're on the same level. Oh my bad, I should put my phone down.
I think just kind of like piggybacking off because you started talking about university, and I was part of the executive board my junior year. And I think for me, I did feel inadequacies as being like the first female to be like head of the chapter in a while. And also I was like Hispanic in predominantly the culture when I was part of the club was like predominantly South Asian, and so I was one of like few Hispanics. So I think primarily what my struggle was I didn't know what a strong female leader had necessarily looked like, and not that I hadn't admired other like female.
But you were president also.
Yes. So it's not that I hadn't admired other females in general, like that were leading, but the presidents that had come before me were young men that I had really admired, but they were men.
Yeah.
And so I struggled a lot with the balance. Like I had mentioned before, I come off sometimes as like severe, more logistically minded, and so I didn't know how to balance. I think the logistic, but then also what people expected of me in terms of like the feminine, kind of more emotionally oriented kind of. So I think no matter whether you're male or female, there should be that balance in leadership. But I think for me, I didn't have it necessarily modeled up close, and so I struggled with that because I was like, okay, how do I lead a chapter the way a woman should lead, or how should like I lead the chapter where I'm not isolating certain like cultural demographics, because I think like in the Hispanic community, I mean, I think it's different for everyone's experience, but I think my experience has been like the women are just as outspoken as the men, depending on the context.
Yeah.
And I feel like my experience, I think, engaging with the South Asian community, the women will be a little more passive than the men sometimes. And so I think culturally that kind of might have clashed. From my perspective, I don't know how my chapter members felt, but for me, I felt that could have been a little like, okay, I'm a young female, so I was a junior, so I was leading people that were older than me, of a different culture, different like gender, and I felt like that could have, I felt conflict on my end.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it was just like my insecurities, but it also could have been a very real kind of conflict that was there. And so I think what helped me kind of deal with that was kind of thinking of a passage in Esther where the Lord speaks to Esther and says like, you were born for such a time as this. And just kind of, it sounds kind of like cliche.
It's so nice though.
Yeah, but it's just kind of like,
nice.
it's just kind of like, okay, I was chosen, like, after this series of, like, men that were leading the chapter, I was chosen to then kind of, like, step into that place, and I need to lead how the Lord is calling me to lead, and not how, like, a woman should lead or a man should lead, just kind of, like, how I should be in myself.
Yeah.
So I think that really helped me because again, like I want to be part of the boys club, but I think recently also my mindset has changed. I think with maturity of my age, but also I recently went to a women's conference that my church put on with the group of churches that I'm part of, and the main speaker was speaking about how as women we carry the feminine heart of God, and so we don't need to compete with men. Because men have their own strengths and women have their own strengths, and in living in the fullness of carrying that feminine heart of God, you are strong and you are worthy and you are this, and so you don't need to compete because you have different
We're
strengths.
created differently.
Yes, exactly. And I think my mentality a lot of the time growing up was like, no, but they need to
see what you're doing.
Yes,
Yeah.
I need to be like just as a badass part of my like French as the guys, but it's like no, I need to be. First of all, as on an individual level, like I need to be as good as I can be.
Yeah.
But then also, I just need to be like the way I was created as a female, whatever my strengths are, as a woman, as myself, and not kind of like compare myself to the strong male role models that I have.
Yeah, because we're different.
Right, exactly. We're different, and that's good. Like different.
Yeah.
Different but equal in your differences.
Yeah.
I've been out of college for like 3 years now, and I think after I graduated, I had to reevaluate who I was, because without leadership positions in college, without all that,
She was also in her
good stuff.
executive board.
Right, so I was on an e-board, but also because we went to a business school where basically the only way you're going to get hired is if you're a go-getter and you know what you're doing and you're a leader, and the leader had.
Okay, we got cut off and our memory card got full, and we have this is our second memory card.
And our second tape.
On our second tape, so Sophie's going to continue her answer again.
Okay, so I left off with saying that I needed to figure out my skills post-undergrad. And I've worked for these past few years on accepting who I am, even my flaws, and embracing my limits. So that might mean for me in the workplace that when I make mistakes, I need to start telling myself that it's okay. That accidents happen, mistakes happen, that I'm not perfect. But perfection was highly valued in my childhood, and that's something that's not realistic, and I have to come to terms with that as well. So coming to terms with my inadequacies has been helpful. helpful. As much as it is helpful to, you know, preach truth over myself, it is also good for me to be honest with how I'm feeling.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know how I'm going to divide this up. It's going to probably be a lot of different segments. I don't even know what video segment you are watching right now, but we hope you guys enjoyed and you got to hear from the female experience of being minority, and also our, you know, Christian perspective thrown in there. So, bye. Our next video is about marriage. It's about marriage. We're going to record right now, so stay tuned.